All right, I'm going to talk fast because I got a lot to say. My name is Krista Schnarr, and I believe that despite the political violence and human rights abuses in Ukraine, the United States should not continue to financially or militarily support Ukraine in the war against Russia. The United States is partially responsible for the political violence in Russia and the human rights abuses. This is due to their imperialistic aggression. In 1991, with the dissolution of the Soviet Union, the Western nations had like this eruption of imperialistic aggression throughout the world. And what we are seeing today in Ukraine is the result of that aggression. We had a little bit of an exposure of it when the phone call between Victoria Nuland and the U.S. ambassador to Ukraine was leaked, and we got to see some of these gangster methods that the United States used within Ukraine that I'll be letting you hear about today. One thing we can talk about too as well is that there was 2 elections where a Russian-backed president was elected in Ukraine, and his name was Viktor Yanukovych, and he was elected twice, 2004 and 2010, and both times he was subsequently removed from power and replaced by a United States-backed president. And one of the times, the Yanukovych, he was diplomatic, and he wanted ties with both the EU and with Russia. So, I mean, that's what you do. But he was trying to lean towards the EU side. So he said, well, while I'm switching over and I'm trying to get more Western allies, with trade, with our economy and things like that, because I'm losing people, I'm probably going to need some financial aid package. So we asked the EU for that, and the EU actually denied him and said no, which is funny to me because they had no problem funding political violence and political actors within Ukraine, but they did not want to fund that switch over for him to the EU. So Russia gave him money and said, here's a financial aid package. And it is believed that the EU said no because of those diplomatic ties. But anyways, the Russians stepped in, gave them some financial aid, and the some people got mad and they protested. And it appeared to the international community that everyone was just out, everyone in Ukraine was just mad and they hated this guy. But that's not the case. You could shine a spotlight anywhere and make anyone believe that that's what's happening everywhere. So the United States took advantage of this. As we learned from Professor, they're going to go in and they're going to, exploit these protesters. They don't necessarily care about the violations, but what they do care about is using them to overturn and destabilize the government, which is exactly what they did. And not only did they do that, they actually financed a coup. So in February 2014, a coup came into power, and this coup is supported by U.S. and European imperialism. It was implemented by far-right shock troops from the right sector and the neo-Nazi Savada Party. That is SVOBODA. I don't know how to pronounce it, but that's what it is. This was the first neo-fascist party since World War II to have any type of place or standing within Europe since then. So that was kind of a big deal. And then during this regime change as well, there was Suedo left. What Suedo means. So Suedo left. They presented this to the international community as a revolution, as everyone loves a revolution, but it was in fact a coup. And that coup, with this regime change, several things happened throughout the country. One, civil war broke out. So now you have the Russian-backed separatists, and you have the United States-backed Ukrainian troops. You have to understand that the boundary activation, when the Soviet Union broke up, you had Ukraine's here, Russia, you have Ukraine here, Russian here, but you also had ethnic Russians, a large population living in Ukraine. And so obviously the civil wars broke out throughout the country. The lack of health and legal protection provided by the new regime, the policies did not benefit workers or common people. They benefited the oligarchs. And so these policies actually pushed the people, the common workers, into the poverty. They were doing really bad. Also, social and democratic rights were dismantled, and the right to dissent or speak your mind and the right to assemble was met with violence. Also, the headquarters of different political parties were burned, set on fire, and then historical facts were changed. They changed textbooks. They started teaching things different. They tore down monuments. They changed street names, all in favor of far-right ideology. Churches and monasteries across the nation were raided and burned down because some of them were neither. Some of them were Russian because Russian people had churches there. Also, Ukraine commits violence against its own civilians, and with the powerful backing of strong nations like the United States, they are able to blame Russia and gain support. Not that Russia doesn't do things, but trust that they're doing things as well. And then from 2014 to the present, the U.S. and United States and NATO have systematically armed and trained far-right forces. And both the Poroshenko and Zelensky regimes work closely with the neo-Nazi Azov battalion to wage indirect war against ethnic Russians in Ukraine. These forces systematically attacked Russian neighborhoods and Russian schools. And May of 2014, I don't know if you've heard of that, a lot of probably people have not, but Ukrainian nationalists locked pro-federalist protesters inside the Odessa trade union house and set it on fire. They blocked them from coming out and locked them in there. 50 people died and 250 people were injured. Also, the Ukrainians attacked a civilian neighborhood, an apartment complex, and were shooting them in the back with guns, these ethnic Russians, and some of them died because they were shot in the back, and others died because they were jumping out the window to escape the bullets, and they jumped to their death. This prompted Putin to go to the EU and say we want an inquiry in human rights abuses and political violence, and the EU ignored him. Hence, obviously, he decided that he's going to invade Russia. And so the Russian seizure and annexation of Crimea, the Donetsk People's Republic, and the Luhansk People's Republic is a direct result of the political violence and human rights violations inflicted on the predominantly ethnic Russian regions of Ukraine. Both countries are guilty of war crimes and media suppression, just like the United States, and the EU is also guilty of those things as well. Turkey and Belarus have continued to try to broker a peace deal, but the United States timely will come in and say, well, here's more money and here's more weapons. And I don't feel that Putin's demands are unreasonable. He says that he wants the annexed places, which are mainly ethnic Russians. And then we had, there was like 11 Russian political parties within Ukraine. There was also, these areas were pulling out. They did not want to be a part of that. And that is their right to self-determination as much as Ukraine has their right to self-determination as well. And he also believes that the demilitarization and the denazification of Ukraine, and if you don't think that Ukraine needs denazified, you have not done your research. And you are a victim to media suppression in the United States, just like you feel like you need to seek out and destroy in Russia. And then NATO, they don't want NATO there. I wouldn't want Russia in my backyard either. I wouldn't want them in Mexico. And let's be honest, Ukraine has never, since 1991, since it's been founded, ever met the requirements to be a NATO nation. The idea that Ukraine can be a NATO nation would only be if it was a puppet government set up and funded directly from the United States, which might be what we're seeing today. But when Ukraine is actually able to become and meet the requirements of NATO, we'll deal with that then.